Good afternoon, everyone. I see a lot of people have joined us, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to this webinar hosted by the American College of Financial Services. Today, we're discussing the topic of diversity in financial services by exploring the opportunities to support growth and leadership for women in the industry. Thank you all for joining us. For those of you who are interested in college recertification credits, I'll mention at the outset that this will certify for those credits, and you can self-report in accordance with existing procedures relating to that. I'm Azish Filabi, the Executive Director of the College's Center for Ethics, and I'll be moderating the conversation today with our two esteemed panelists. I'll take a few minutes to introduce each of them now. Hilary Fiorella is the Executive Director of the College's Center for Women in Financial Services. She's been in various leadership roles throughout her career, including as Chief Operating Officer for the Money Management Institute, as well as Senior Vice President at Fiserv, which is now Tegra 118, where she led various functions, including client services, marketing, and product management. We're also joined today by Denise Hardin, a Senior Vice President at State Farm. Denise has had a highly successful career at State Farm, where she began in 1989 as an agent. She quickly ascended into leadership roles in various regions throughout the United States, including roles in field leadership, as well as the customer care center. She currently manages the West Central market area for State Farm. And she's also a graduate of the American College and is active in the community, including her role as an advisory board member for the college's Center for Ethics, for which I'm personally grateful. Our discussion today will cover a variety of topics, including women in financial services sales, leadership challenges in corporate roles, as well as research findings relating to how people and companies can support women in business leadership generally. We'll also discuss women as financial decision makers and how companies view these gender dynamics in the markets. I'll moderate the conversation today between Hilary and Denise on these topics, and invite you all to join as well via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So to begin, we'll start discussing some of the challenges for women in leadership, in particular, research relating to barriers for growth and leadership. The number of women in financial services remains low, although we've seen some improvement in recent years. The number of leadership is unfortunately still lower. While there has been some progress, banks and insurance companies continue to deal with these challenges in practice. And I'd like to explore some of the research to understand these leadership dynamics. Research that was conducted in 2016 by the American College by our predecessors at the Center for Ethics and the Center for Women here at the college found that the experience of potential opportunities for success differed based on the respondent's gender in that research process. In other words, when financial services professionals were surveyed about the perception of opportunities for leadership, our researchers found that women generally believed that the industry did not equally promote the success of men and women, while men, they generally thought that success was available to all, regardless of gender. So Hilary, I'd like to start with you. What are your thoughts with respect to this research? Are there perceived discrepancies in opportunity?
Thank you, Azish. I'm glad to be here with you and Denise today. So there's a saying that you can't fix something until you know there's a problem. 88% of the men in the study believe that the culture and policies at their firm equally promote the success of an associate regardless of gender. So men don't think there's an issue and they don't think that gender impacts their success. Men tend to highlight the importance of their talents and their efforts for their success and view their gender as a neutral condition. On the other hand, women tended to perceive their gender as influencing in both positive and negative ways their interactions with clients and leaders. I know we're going to talk about this more later, but that's a high-level summary from the results of the survey.
Thanks so much, Hilary. And do you see any divergence between field positions and leadership in the head office? Any dynamics there that we should be aware of?
I think that's one for Denise.
I think that it is proven out when you look at all of the various studies. There seems to be a little bit greater penetration of females within the field perspective, and it does become a smaller funnel as you move up within the leadership ranks or within the C-suite. So yeah, I would affirm that that is the case.
Okay, and we'll explore some of these dynamics as we continue the conversation today. Continuing to think about these issues within leadership and potential barriers to growth, we often hear about women trying to keep up with the culture of the firm itself. Some call these microaggressions and their experiences relating to it. Others refer to these dynamics as challenges to inclusive culture generally within the organization. But generally, the research findings through the qualitative interviews in particular describe this challenge to belonging within the culture of the firm. So Hilary, I'm curious, as you're looking at this research as well, how have women described the perceptions relating to this challenge?
This study noted the persistence of continued activities or behaviors that resist gender integration. So for example, some offices, and Denise may or may not be able to reinforce this, some offices still foster informal networking opportunities like golf or drinks after work. So these can be hard for women with caregiving responsibilities. Even work-related activities like early morning or late afternoon training sessions or the infamous 7 a.m. breakfast meeting can be seen as microaggressions towards women who have to care for small children. So these lost opportunities to network can cost women business, like not being there to get the new accounts or the redistribution of accounts when an advisor leaves, or advancing in the organization because they're less visible, and can make women feel like they don't belong because they're not taking part of those informal networking opportunities.
And Denise, we are curious to see from a practitioner's perspective how you're seeing these challenges in practice. And I think related, this idea of the infamous work-life balance challenge that there's been numerous research studies relating to, but also a constant conversation for us in society. Does that remain an issue even in the modern workplace as you think about the ability for technology to facilitate some of this work in general?
You know, it's interesting because if you had asked me that question, I think prior to what we're all experiencing with COVID, because that's kind of been a neutralizer, right? Because a lot of things, Hilary, that you just stated actually occurred within the workplace environment, or the ability to connect with individuals in a way that's outside of business. And right now we're limited to that. So honestly, the COVID environment has kind of been a bit of an equalizer. So I'm anxious to see what that does in the long run. But when you think about those opportunities that were provided to maybe our male counterparts versus the female, I think that's a challenge that, yes, you know, we've all had to work through in some form or fashion, but creating an organization that acknowledges and understands that and looks for vehicles or venues to open that unofficial door, or the more, you know, like the golf outings, Hilary, that you created, you know, create ways within the normal work day so that if a mother does have, you know, whether it's an older parent at home that they're caring for or younger children, it just creates access. And then I do believe all of us as women in the profession need to help other women open that door as well, or create opportunities for that to occur within the normal workday.
I think, to your point, Denise, I think that the whole pandemic environment has highlighted a lot of those challenges, whether it's homeschooling or caregiving or having a parent live with you. And I think that I would hope that when and if we ever do go back to the office, that we take this learning with us. And this knowledge that we've all gained, that, you know, some of the things that we did from a legacy perspective, you know, may not work for everybody, and maybe we'll adjust going forward based on that.
I hope so.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a bit more throughout this hour together in terms of opportunities to be able to support growth and leadership based on those dynamics as well. I appreciate your addressing the challenges. So turning back to this research that was conducted in 2016 by the college, some of the findings question the pros and cons of the perception that the financial services sales environment is a meritocracy. And I wanted to explore this concept of meritocracy a bit with you both. In principle, given that yearly sales numbers or assets under management, they're easily quantifiable, it's easier to compare across individuals and assess performance. And in fact, what we saw in the research is that both men and women responded that they were attracted to the field of financial services because of that element relating to meritocracy. However, some of the women felt that the narrow focus on financial success did not actually capture their day-to-day challenges in achieving those same outcomes. So if we're just looking at the numbers, we're missing a more qualitative aspect of the daily challenges that might have a gendered dynamic to it. So Denise, I'd like to start with you in getting your take on this with respect to the interplay of meritocracy and inclusive cultures in business. Is the continued focus on meritocracy a challenge to diversity, and how might that play out?
You know, it's interesting because I read multiple articles on this just, you know, in preparing for this, because I knew what my line of sight was, but I wanted to know from a broader perspective. And everything that I am seeing or reading would say, you know, meritocracy in its original or pure state was done with intent. Yeah, and you could get behind it and say that makes sense. But what it does is it shields the insight to unconscious biases. And, you know, if you look back to what are people bringing to the table that maybe can't be defined in the actual output of numbers, and how can you account for that? And I think, you know, to just strictly look at the merits or the numbers, because trust me, in State Farm, you guys, we do that. We evaluate everything from a field perspective. But you have to also take the blinders off to look at what people are bringing to the table that maybe is driving a greater result that is not demonstrated in the actual output or a figure that you can correlate to that. Because I do think the intent was founded on a basis that would make sense to people. But as you dig into it, you know, it covers up or shields a lot of what we can't overlook, because diversity in the workplace is best for all of us as individuals, as well as for organizations, because you achieve more when you have, you know, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, et cetera, thought diversity. I think when you think about a meritocracy as well, it's also making the assumption that we are all starting at the same point, or you know, we're all at the same level when we do step in. I think you have to step back and give people credit for life learnings, what they're bringing to the table, and just their broader experience beyond just the numbers would be my response to that.
Absolutely. And Denise, when we speak later about opportunities to remove some of these barriers, I'd love to follow up and learn about how in practice we might try to address some of this meritocracy challenge. Hilary, what are your thoughts on managing meritocracy, staying with the challenge piece of it?
I have to agree with a lot of what Denise said, because assuming that sales is a meritocracy is accepting that there are no barriers for women or minorities. It also assumes that there's no advantage to being a white male. So, and I would say that there's a resistance to change a system that seems to be working, right? For the most part, it's working for the majority. So changing a system that could impact those advantages seems risky. And historically, you know, men have been paid more, hired more, promoted more, and been on the receiving end a lot of those benefits that we talked about before. So getting new accounts or the redistribution of accounts when an advisor leaves. So we actually heard this again in a survey that we just commissioned that will be released at the end of this month, that confirmed that one of the ways that diversity is impeded in sales is that lack of transparency in client distribution. And the requirement that new advisors earn their keep. So these are ways that impede diverse talent from coming into the business. If it's slanted towards, you know, the folks who have been there for a while, or who have a pipeline to people who they can tap for business that may not apply to women and minorities in some cases. And that tends to impede that very diversity that we're seeking.
That's really interesting, Hilary. I'd love to hear more about this client distribution channel and how you think that might manifest itself in the day-to-day in terms of the research that you've seen. So as we turn to this client side of the business, I'll start with Denise, and then Hilary, I'd love your take on this as well. Denise, what have you seen in practice with respect to client preferences and this idea that Hilary mentioned in terms of client distribution challenges that might have an element relating to minority communities or women as it relates to their book of business? Are there gender dynamics at play with respect to building these relationships, and how does it work in practice on the financial services sales side? Any experience, or what's your take on it? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of information to support the fact that, first of all, when you think from the client's perspective, you have more and more women that are in control of the finances at home and have the discretionary income to prepare for future state. And I found multiple sources that stated women prefer to work with other women, not 100%, but I mean, I think there, as a practitioner, I think there are things that women demonstrate that women and men, within this, from a client perspective, would seek out a woman to work with. And not to say that men can't or don't have this trait in an absolute form. I'm not saying that, but women tend to be better at active listening, compassion, building trust, because what we do within the financial services arena really is a relationship aspect. And so when you look from the practitioner's point of view, women have everything, I believe, to be very confident about can they be successful within that venue. And then from the customer perspective, they're seeking out traits that women hold. And, honestly, I believe more and more customers or clients, I'm sorry, I'm mixing the insurance world with the financial services world, but more and more clients are also seeking firms that have diversity representation as to who they can engage with as their advisors. So I don't know if I'm actually hitting on the core of what you're saying. So Hilary, you can clean me up. But when I think about from a client perspective and then what women within this field can bring to the table, I see so much opportunity here. And I know we're going to expand on this even a little bit more, so I don't want to get too far down the road. I just believe there's great opportunity to help guide, fulfill, build confidence for the average client. And we as women, a lot of times don't even realize the great assets we hold that we can bring to the table. So Hilary, clean me up.
Well, so I spend a lot of my time reading research, and there's a lot of research that supports what you said, Denise. There are some traits that are attributed to successful advisors, as you mentioned, empathy, active listening, and women typically score very high in those areas. There was one study that stated that women do very well broaching the subject of long-term care with clients or customers. They tend to have a knack in terms of being able to open up those conversations, whereas some men advisors actually admitted to, that's one area that they needed to learn from their women counterparts. They just weren't quite sure how to broach that conversation. And in some cases, it can be uncomfortable for a man to say, listen, at some point, you're going to be incapacitated, or you're going to need long-term care, or something's going to change, or you're not going to be, in the same state you are today. And for some reason, it's easier to have that conversation with a woman in some cases, the research says. In terms of women as clients, they want understanding. Everybody wants understanding. Everybody wants to be understood. Everybody wants their needs and wants understood. But women specifically, in research after research, say they don't like to be talked down to. And they don't like somebody to assume that they can't understand what's being discussed. So they do like an explanation, but they don't like to be talked down to. And they don't necessarily want a female advisor in all cases, but they do appreciate those traits that we may assign as feminine, like empathy and good listening. And there is some research that, you know, anecdotally states that some men don't prefer a female advisor, in fact, don't want a female advisor. And so if you're a female advisor and you have a man sitting across the table from you, they feel like they have to prove themselves, whereas they don't feel like their male counterparts have to do that. They walk in, they have their credentials, they have their designations, they have their licenses, they have their experience, and they don't have to explain anything or prove anything. And women advisors think that they have that much of a hurdle to overcome with a new client just because. And so they'll highlight their education, they'll highlight their experience and their designations, and they will eventually win over their clients, but it just takes a little more effort that a man might not have to make at the outset of the relationship.
Absolutely. And it's interesting hearing this, these anecdotes, because it takes me back to when we were talking about the meritocracy challenges. And I'm curious about how you both might put this in that context as well, in terms of the numbers not necessarily showing some of those uphill battles, right? In terms of helping build confidence in the clients in terms of that conversation and guide and fulfill their dreams, knowing that part of that challenge, there is a gender dynamic there. So I'm curious for either of you, Denise or Hilary, if you're, how you might put it in the context of that meritocracy when it comes to a leadership management challenge, when we think about it at the institutional level.
Hilary, I'll let you start on that one.
So, yeah, McKinsey reported a really well done research, and they coined a phrase, the broken rum, that says that men outnumber women in leadership because women don't make it to that first level of leadership at the same rate that men do. And so you can't make up that ground. So the disparity was somewhere, you know, in the 80% to 70%, and you just can't make that up over time. Some of the explanations for the broken rung include things like, you know, women take break in their careers. Women's careers tend to be a whole lot more volatile than men's. They take breaks for a number of different reasons, and it's hard to recapture those gains and that traction and that visibility when you potentially take some time off for whatever it may be. Perhaps you're going back to school, you know, getting advanced education. Perhaps you're a trailing spouse and moving across the country. Maybe you got married, maybe you had a kid, maybe you were responsible for taking care of an ailing parent, but there's a number of reasons that women sort of fall back to a lesser degree, men take on those responsibilities or have those opportunities to go back to school or become a trailing spouse, but it's typically less than it is for women. And I don't know, Denise, if in State Farm, you see any of that in your practice.
Yeah, and you know, it's thank you for sharing the educational or the study aspect first, because I had seen a wide variety of information on that. One thing I would say as well is I think there are things as an organization to address, Hilary, everything that you just pointed out, that, you know, firms need to lean in and address themselves, as well as things as women that we could address to position ourselves better, even if we do need to, you know, whether it's taking time off to address something or whatever the case may be. So from a firm perspective, let me just say this, you know, as we think about the advantage of having more women in leadership, because it does, you know, when it gets into the leadership perspective versus the practitioner, you know, we already talked about it, the funnel does narrow, so the numbers are fewer. So if we think about things like really flexibility within the work schedule or approved sabbaticals, or, you know, I read an article that said, you know, mandatory vacation. I don't know about you all, but I've lost more vacation through my working career than what I mean, horrifies me to think about that. And I know why I did it, because I was so afraid I'd fall behind if I actually took time. But what that provides both the firm and their clients is, someone who is fresher, much more engaged, the work-life balance, to go back to that perspective that was already brought up. It's important to be supportive of that. The trailing spouse scenario, Hilary, that you just stated, whether someone's trailing or not, we can't get so hung up on the fact of you have to check these boxes for so many years before we look at you and say, hey, you're prepared for this really difficult assignment or this promotion. That's where it goes back to, I believe, what I was referencing earlier, and take people's experience into account, whether it's lack of tenure in the role or just thinking about the challenge through their life that they have been able to address. Because I guarantee all of our experiences are going to lend to a different perspective, which if we've got a variance of perspective, you all, when we're trying to create solutions, whether it be for the firm or for the customer themselves, I just think that creates an advantage. But we have to recognize that and really bring that forward as we're assessing, again, who gets the promotion or who gets the challenging assignment, et cetera, and not be within tunnel vision of, check the boxes and how long you've been in role, et cetera. To me, that's very old think. And I think firms are working very hard to address that. The thing that really broke my heart as I was prepping for this was just the assumption of the amount of time to really make a dent in getting more women in higher levels within companies. But hey, we can all lean in and help that. That will make a difference.
And just to clarify, Denise, in terms of the assumption of the amount of time, in terms of trying to address that gap in leadership, how many years it'll take for us to get there as an industry? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, yes.
And I think too, when both women and clients see women in financial services, I think it's helpful. So from a employee perspective, I appreciate seeing women in leadership because I know it's attainable. And I know for any minority, women included, if you can't see it, you can't be it. Right. So seeing women in leadership, figuring it out, having the work-life balance is hugely inspiring and helpful. And I think helps us as an industry. From a client perspective, I think too, that as more women take control of their financial lives and wellness, seeing more women in the industry is also helpful. So we must, continue to persevere and help be the change in our organizations that create an environment that allows for that unavoidable volatility that happens in life, not just to women, but to men too, to families, to whoever.
And, Hilary, something interesting, if I can jump in and tag on, when we talk about clients wanting to see that, think about the practitioner who has faced some of the same challenges that their clients are facing and the insight that can bring to helping them create solutions for what that client is trying to address, or maybe even challenges that they're not aware of. So when you think about maybe that woman who has had some life challenges or had to step away to take care of aging parents or younger children, their ability to connect and go deep and really lean in, because what we're talking about is a relationship business, their ability to help the customer connect with them, to me, whether you're male or female, but it tends to typically be more the female. When you can do that and connect in that fashion because you've walked in those shoes, that carries a credibility that I think we underestimate in the whole scheme of things.
And I've talked to a number of advisors in my role here. I had the wonderful opportunity to talk to many student and alumni at the college, and they've been so generous with their time and experience with me, which I appreciate tremendously. And a number of them have said that it was those challenges that led them to an area of specialization. And so a number of the advisors I talked to said, you know, they had a special needs child, or they cared for an elder who lost everything, or they had a special needs child who they were trying to get into college. And so they learned how to navigate all of that. And that turned into their life's work. That turned into their area of specialty. And then they were able to share that with other families who were going through the same thing, and impart that knowledge and that experience on so many more people, which I think is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is resonating with our audience as well. I'm keeping an eye on the chat, and one audience member has mentioned that taking time off to help with a special needs child actually gave them this outside experience to help others outside the norm as well. So thank you for contributing via the chat and the Q&A entry point as well. If there are questions, there are a couple already in here, which we'll address in the second part of our webinar today, but I appreciate the continued contributions via the chat as well. So staying with this leadership development theme, Hilary, I'm curious, as we're continuing to think about leadership development and some of this challenge around that first rung, right? The McKinsey research that you pointed to, and how men outnumber women nearly 2 to 1 in terms of taking that first step into the management roles, which then has an impact on long-term leadership development. One would then assume that age is a helpful factor when it comes to women in leadership. And I'm curious, from your perspective and what you may have read, how does age factor into it? How does that play into this leadership dynamic?
Well, the study that you referenced at the outset of the webinar, the one that we did and we'll make available to everybody on the call, it showed that as women aged, they gained insights, but not necessarily opportunities. So women from 18 to 29 started out very optimistic and very idealistic. And they got much less optimistic as they aged. So between 18 and 29, 74% of women believe that there is equal opportunity. Just to compare, men of that same age group are at 88% believing that there's equal opportunity going in. So that's the starting point. There's a big dip in perceptions about opportunity as women enter childbearing years. So we talked about that. But by the time they reach 60, it drops significantly. At ages 60 to 69, only 50% of women think that the policies and the cultures of the financial services industry are equally supportive of the success of men and women. So, and men at that same time between 60 and 69 are still at 88%. Their perceptions don't change. It doesn't change at all for them. So part of it is that women who have children, there's a perception that they're less dedicated to their careers, right? Because they have this distraction, they put children first. And so that obviously impacts women's opportunity for leadership, which we've been talking about. We talked about that they want to see women leaders who have a good life balance. If they're going to make those trade-offs, they want to see it. And lastly, many women, there's study after study about what attracts women to financial services. And they say it's they want to serve, they want to do good, they want to do it for the benefit, right? And sometimes the metrics that we use don't align with that serving customers. So they don't align with those ideals necessarily. So if I'm a woman entering the business and I want to serve my clients, but yet I have to make a certain amount of outbound calls, or I have to have a certain number of production, that may not just align with my ideals or my ideal of what the job or the career might offer. So unfortunately, some women decide it's just not worth the price to pay, whether it's a trade-off with their family, or they're not getting to serve the way that they thought they would. So they self-select out of the job and sometimes out of the industry. But on the plus side, as they age, many women advisors, if they've been able to hang in there and figure it out and make it work, and they have a supportive environment and a supportive team and a supportive job, and if they can last, there's a ton of flexibility and there's a ton of rewards as they age and presumably their business grows. So I from everything that I've read, there's great opportunity in the beginning, then the real world kicks in and you have to power through it. But if you can power through it, there's tremendous opportunity and upside in the business as an advisor, as a female advisor. And Denise, I think you can probably talk about that trajectory too, right?
Yeah, and Hilary, the thing though is, I think we have to challenge, whether we've muscled through and gotten to the point where the flexibility is there. I think we have to be the ones to really express the need to change that type of mentality, so that we can keep more women and build in that flexibility. But no, I think you said it very well. I think that's exactly the environment that all too often, or those situational dynamics are all too often what can cause women to step away. But it doesn't have to be that way. I really think that we can modify and own that aspect to really change the culture within this industry. Because, if someone's not able to stay and make the number of phone calls, but yet their client base is really connected with them and they have that steadfast relationship, I think anyone would say, I don't want to lose that, just because, they maybe are more restrictive in the amount of time that they can either be there, or, to your point, the metrics that we choose to measure, let's be a change agent and modify that and get to the metrics that really make the difference. And really work to retain the folks that have raised their hand and stepped in. But, I honestly believe this starts long before women get into the financial services world, that, we've got to go back within time, as they're maturing just overall, and really build a confidence in women and encourage and drive some change so that we can keep them long term. But it's really disappointing when you look at how many, when you look at the workforce in general that steps in, and how that just restricts for the women as time progresses. And they are not in the position then to achieve that higher level. We have to change that. And I think the opportunity's there. I really do.
I'd love to turn to the opportunity. If I might ask you one question that's come in through our chat, just on the final point around the challenges is, a participant has quoted an HBR article about what's really holding women back. And some of the gender scholars had actually pointed to this general problem of overwork that prevails within contemporary corporate culture. And I know that in recent years, and certainly this year with the pandemic, we're starting to see more of this emphasis on health, right? And finding that space for mental health and well-being in general as being important for not only work-life balance, but just to be able to maintain healthy home cultures, to be honest, right? In terms of what we're all balancing. So I'm curious if you have any final thoughts perhaps on not only the gender dynamics, but the overall culture of work, and if there's been any evolution relating to competitiveness in the workplace or workplace culture that you might want to reflect on.
If I could just make a couple comments, and Hilary, you jump in here. With the pandemic, the work from home, it is concerning. And I think I read the same article that was referenced within the chat. It's the lines have been completely blurred between professional and personal when you're working from home, and you can't shut it off. I made a joke with some folks that I work with, and I hope this is not too blunt to say, but I even had to ask the question, when was it decided that just because there's a pandemic, you don't need time for a restroom break or time for lunch? It's just crazy how things shifted on a dime due to the work from home push that we all have experienced. I think though, personally, and I'm going to take ownership here as a leader within my firm and the folks that I work with, I can't tell you how many times either I've got someone on vacation or it's 9 o'clock at night, and I've had to either IM them or phone them and say, get off your computer. I think we have to be supportive as leaders to say, you have to break it off. There is a component of your personal health, your well-being that is really important to me, to make sure that you're not overly stressed, that you do have separation, because the fatigue associated with this is real. And we're learning, I don't even think we know all the repercussions of it yet, because it's all still so fresh for us and kind of raw. But I believe, I don't know if, Azish, I'm actually answering your question. I believe there's more unknown there than known, but I think all of us have to be the driver of, let's get this corrected and give people some balance. You can't exist without it. I think it's just detrimental.
There was some research that I read that talked about in hiring women and helping them be successful. So the firm said, what we did was we got their husbands in, or their spouses, or their partners, or whoever it may be, and said, your spouse, friend, partner, whatever, is going to need support. So you're going to have to pick up some of the slack at home. And it was referred to as the second shift. Mm-hmm. So a lot of women, after they stop working, or maybe maybe some of us unplug at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, go have dinner, clean up, try to spend some time with whoever it may be you're sharing the pandemic with, and then go back and do some more work. So this firm, and this was pre-pandemic, said that they actually brought, significant others into the conversation to say, she's going to need some help here. And in order to be a successful advisor, you're going to have to pick up some of the slack, which I thought that was insightful, ambitious. I'm not sure how realistic it was. And I would love to do some follow-up research to find out how that went, how that went for them. But in terms of the real impact of the pandemic on women, schools and daycare centers have largely closed, right? So, and women, it's a fact, are still the primary caregivers. So women are dropping out of the workforce in greater numbers than men. In September, more than 865,000 women left the workforce when 216 men did, okay? So not all the losses were voluntary, not were all in financial services or due to homeschooling or caregiving. But in September, women left the workforce. The number of women who left outnumbered men by 4 times. That's pretty significant.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate your raising those statistics, Hilary. I think it's really important to think about that in light of the pandemic. And to Denise's point, we don't yet understand the long-term challenges we'll be dealing with from the tumultuous year that we've had. So I think it's important to keep this in sight going forward as well. So we wanted to talk about some of the opportunities and the strategies that companies and leaders have taken to help address these gaps that we've been discussing on the webinar today. And so I'd like to start with thinking about some of the affinity groups within organizations. I know in recent years, we've seen the increase in the availability of women's networks in the workplace and similar affinity groups for minorities as well. And I wanted to start, perhaps Hilary, we could start with you. What are the patterns that you've observed relating to these women's networks in financial services? And what do you think about their impacts and their effects? Do they help address any of these gaps we've discussed?
Well, I know I learn a lot from them. So I have a personal goal to connect with as many women's networks and initiatives as I can, just to learn from them, because everybody does things differently. Everybody has a different emphasis. People have different experiences, and I love learning from everybody. So if there's somebody who wants to connect, I'm open to connecting and would love to learn about your particular women's initiative. According to our research, the study said that women were split on gender specific affinity groups. So some women appreciate the all female groups where they can build their network or learn a specific skill without feeling self-conscious. But other women were just like, I don't need it. I would rather have a mixed gender affinity group, you know, a mixed gender group where I can hear from the top producers and learn from them. I think there's a lot to be learned there. And if I want to have, you know, a session with the girls, I'll go off and have a session with the girls. So what I would say though, in terms of having affinity groups, it is very important in recruiting. So if you're looking for new talent and your firm does not have an affinity group, you're going to be missing out on diversity talent, because minorities and women are looking for that when they're looking for new jobs and employers. They're looking for that. And in, CFP did a study in 2016 called Why Diversity Matters. And at the time, 34% of senior level women in financial services said that they received advice or career guidance from a manager or senior leader. But 44% of men said that they had. So there's a disparity there too. It's important to find a sponsor or a mentor, in as much as it is to be a part of an affinity group, because a sponsor can help you eliminate obstacles, look at things from another perspective, help promote your successes when you don't want to be the one tooting your own horn, and potentially alerting you to opportunities that you may not know of. So I think that having an affinity group is a must-have for attracting new talent. I think that you have to listen to your audience and see what works and what your employees need or want, and make them available and make them self-forming, you know, based on whether they want to self-select into a all-female group or a mixed group, and promote the idea of sponsors and mentors to help women get ahead in the business. Because I don't think that today you can succeed without having somebody have your back, like a sponsor.
Absolutely. Denise, what's your take on this issue? How have you experienced or seen affinity groups work in practice?
Well, I am a fan of affinity groups, and gender mix, as well as, you know, just maybe an all-female group. I think they're very healthy, and when you get with the right group, it can be very, very enriching. And the reason I say the right group, I remember early in my career, I had joined an affinity group, and the conversation was centered around how do we be more like the men, so that we have opportunity. And I remember, but this was my one and only session, but I remember my comment was, I don't want to be like the men. I want to be the best that I can be. And I want to make a difference and show, I want to earn opportunity on my merit. So it's not about trying to look like everybody else, but, let's all focus on being the best we are. So that's why I say, I think affinity groups are very beneficial. Just make sure you're in the right one that's enriching. So that's one thing I would say. I think though, it goes beyond just the affinity groups, because I loved what you said, Hilary, about the sponsorship. I think, something that I really focus on now is I want to be a mentor to women and instill power within all ranks of the organization, so that they have even greater opportunity than what I've had the privilege of experiencing. To me, that's a win for me. If I can see them surpass even what I've done, I'd be thrilled for them. So, this is part of though, where I was going back to, I think though, it's even before women get in the work environment. If we can plug into young women, even still in their teens, and instill or build confidence in them, and then share the breadth of and the passion behind, Hilary, the financial services aspect. It is viewed as a male dominating opportunity still, but there's such a greatness that women bring to the table here and are just as insightful, just as intelligent, and can connect for all the reasons we've already discussed. But I think it's an evolution that as a firm and then as individuals that want to see women be successful, we need to think through how we can impact that. You know, having the confidence and being able to speak to the value without bragging, but speak to the value that you bring to the table. You know, I think of a trait that so often I'm helping women with today. They're thinking differently about a topic when they're in broad conversation, maybe with peers and upper level management, and they're assessing it differently, and they're fearful to bring it forward because they're like, no one else is thinking like this. Well, you know, that's great. You know, we need to build confidence in women and really in everyone, that even when you're seeing something through a different lens or thinking about it differently, share it. But have confidence in the fact that you're bringing value to the table. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how much information will say, you know, that men feel so much more confident and all of the opportunity they've achieved is because of how great they are, versus women take kind of a different view, and it's, you know, it's luck, or, you know, it's just, I kind of fell into it. Mm-hmm. But hey, we are just as, there is no gender specific as to who has more intelligence or who has more power. We just have to be confident and make sure that we're leveraging that opportunity. But I think that's kind of that's a dynamic that we have to take head on from an early age and get women out of that thought process.
That's a really interesting point, Denise. And I think that, you know, it speaks to the opportunity for managers to create environments and team cultures that allows for people to be able to speak up, to share their perspectives, even if they're not 100% sure about where that might go. There's the receiving side of it, and the important role of managers. And one of the questions that we received was, what can managers do, particularly male managers, and recognizing that there's more men in leadership within the industry. What can they do to help support some of these growth opportunities that you both mentioned? Any other remaining thoughts on that question?
Well, I think anytime that a man backs a woman up in a meeting publicly or otherwise, it instills confidence, allyship. You know, somebody has your back. You're not going to get shot down. You're more likely to continue to contribute. And recognize, to Denise's point, those different skills. We're all different, men or women, we're just all different. And, you know, everybody has their own little superpower that they bring to the table. And I remember there was one person I worked with who was brilliant, but half the time we didn't know what that person was talking about. But there was one person on the team who could always translate and say, I think this is what so-and-so is saying. And you know, we so appreciated that that person could help bring out whatever it was that was going on in the meeting. So look for, you know, ways to contribute, applaud them, highlight them, give, you know, if they're speaking up for the first time, give them the opportunity, have their back. If they get shot down by somebody, man or woman, continue to have their back. Offer to talk to them about it afterwards so that they don't get discouraged. I think there's a number of ways that we can promote leadership in our organizations to make sure that the folks we work with continue to learn and grow and want to take those chances and want to speak up in front of other people. I was also struck by one of your colleagues, Denise, I talked to a while back, started her career as an intern in high school with State Farm. And that story stuck with me. I think it's such a wonderful story. And it goes back to, if you can see it, you can be it. So she needed a summer job. She got a job in a State Farm office in her town in high school. And she got to see women agents. She got to see what they did and how they helped people. And when she went to college, unlike me, who had no idea what I wanted to be, she knew she wanted to be a State Farm agent because she saw them in action and she saw them helping people and making people's lives better. And I thought that was so great. So I think too, for anybody who can bring a young person, bring a young woman into your office and let her see what you do and see how it impacts people and see what a rewarding career it can be and see the interaction between people and the cool offices and I don't know, the coffee machine, whatever, you know, is cool about your office. When we get back to offices, I would strongly encourage that. It made such an impact on me.
No, that's a fantastic anecdote, Hilary, and I think that resonates really well in terms of just the day-to-day and the small steps that can actually have a really large impact at the management level, and certainly with younger professionals and soon to be young professionals, how that can have a lasting impact. In the last few minutes that we have left, and really is just a couple of minutes, what we've been talking about that's been behind the scenes in this hour together is around the business case with respect to diversity. So not only women, but also minorities and people of color throughout the United States. And I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes addressing it more directly. And Hilary, perhaps I'll start with you. I know that you've been thinking about this from the Women's Center perspective in terms of the untapped markets, and what should a corporate leader think about with respect to the business case relating to diversity here?
So we are going to be releasing another research, a white paper that is on the untapped market that is women, and it's called "The Future Client is Female," and everybody will have access to it once we publish it. So women are more educated to begin with. So now, since the 1980s, more women are enrolled in and graduating from college than men. More women are employed today. They live longer. And so we're looking at $11 trillion in joint assets to be transferred to women in the next 10 years. And McKinsey says that women will control 30 trillion with a T in assets by 2030, which results in, so if those assets were retained by the firms where they reside, that results in a 33% revenue potential just by retaining those assets. So financial services could be missing out on $700 billion in revenue opportunity by failing to meet the needs of women. It's a compelling business case. We'll have a lot more of the details in the white paper at the end of the month. But you know, the fact is that there's more of us working, so we have assets. We're more educated than ever before. We're living longer. We're a fantastic opportunity. And firms just have to step up and meet the needs of women through a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And I do think that a lot of firms are making adjustments and recognizing that this market needs a slightly different approach. And in order to have more women advisors, they're going to have to make some adjustments from, you know, the team approach to compensation, to hours, to early morning meetings, to all of the things that we're talking about. I am encouraged by the conversations that I have with a lot of firms that are actually recognizing that and making those changes.
Well, thank you so much for that, Hilary. And there's clearly so much more for us to talk about. I appreciate the questions that have been coming in that we haven't had an opportunity to address. It is 1 minute to 3, so I'm going to keep us on time and thank Hilary for her time and contribution today. And Denise, thank you for your contribution to us at the American College through this webinar and advisory board service as well. Thank you all for joining us today. We do have the white papers that the white paper that we mentioned already published on the college's website. You can access it through the Women's Center portal or through the Ethics Center portal. And the new white paper that Hilary mentioned will also be available on the college's website at the Women's Center site. We'll follow up with the available links to all of the attendees via follow-up email today. Thank you again for your time and your attending, and we hope to stay in touch. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.